In this meeting, I'm hopefully going to go through two topics. We're not going to go through the relevant exercises like I noted in the announcement, just because the competition is ongoing at the moment. So your practice is just doing the challenges. Yeah, so the two main topics of interest today are going to be forensics and cryptography. I'm going to go ahead and start with forensics first, just because it's a little bit less complicated, I guess, conceptually, but I think in practice it's a little bit more difficult. And I think the challenges reflect that. Okay, so what is forensics? So forensics in general is just collecting, saving, looking through, analyzing evidence in general. Obviously, the police use forensics to be able to track down like what happened in a crime after it happened. But in our case, we are collecting and analyzing digital evidence to understand what happened in a cyber incident, right? Whether somebody gained access or if it's like some sort of insider threat, what have it. Yeah, so some applications for forensics, right, where you might see it is incidence response, right? So as soon as the enterprise or the organization realizes that there is some sort of intrusion, um, they're they're the first ones on the job, and they're taking a look at any traces left over to kind of piece together what happened. Also, insider threat investigation, that's kind of part of incident response, but not so much. Incident response is kind of like the EMT, right? They're the first on the scene. Whereas once you kind of determine that there is an insider threat, you go ahead and investigate them. Okay. And obviously, with an insider threat, there are going to be forensics left over, right? Seeing who accessed some piece of information, with what credentials, all that kind of stuff. Additionally, malware analysis, right? Malware leaves a lot of traces behind due to needing to obfuscate themselves, right? To hide information about themselves so that they are not plainly seen, whether it is by the user or by some antivirus program. So a lot of forensics use in analyzing malware. And then finally, legal and regulatory reporting, right? Whenever you need a report to some agency or some three-letter establishment or whatever, you need to collect your evidence and create a human readable summary to submit to them. Okay. Just as a note, evidence in general must be handled in a way that keeps its integrity, which means it's not changed, right? So evidence should be unchanged. And then additionally, it should be handled in a way that keeps its chain of custody, which basically just means that the evidence needs to maintain a record of who accessed it and when, right? So make sure data stays the same and you know what handled it when. I say what because not only is it a user, but it could be a program as well. Okay, cool. And so here are some key phases of the forensics, not really cycle, but just timeline. So the first is going to be identification, right? This is going to be figuring out where your evidence is, right? So recognizing potential sources of evidence. And so some examples of where you would find that would be your CM or intrusion logs, right? So CM are like tools like Snort, for example, that tell you. Um, about intrusion and they do log aggregation and stuff like that. It's just a big like super tool. Okay. So identifying where evidence would be kind of the first step. Secondly, once you have the evidence, it's about preserving it. So you want to make sure that the data won't be altered or deleted by accident. So usually you are making a bunch of backups. If it's like a drive, like a disk drive, or if it's like a USB stick, you're usually imaging those drives as well. So you're making sure that the data that you have is as you collected it, right? Otherwise, it's not useful, right? If it's altered, um, if it's altered, it's not going to be too useful versus, um, well, I guess it depends on how altered it is. If it's like a simple minor bit shift that really doesn't matter, it's whatever. But still, you just want to keep it preserved as cleanly as possible. Okay. Next is going to be collecting. So obviously, once you have backed up, imaged, right, stored everything safely, right, keyword being safely, you wanna go ahead and collect it and get it out of the system, right? So, obviously, you're probably not gonna be analyzing the system, at rest. You're probably gonna be taking information off of the system and then, examining it elsewhere. So that's why you would wanna be getting it off the device, safely, as in, you don't corrupt it or delete or I guess, mess up the system that you're taking the data off, but also completely, right? You wanna make sure that the data that you get is full. It's a complete record of exactly what it is that you preserved and identified. Okay, once you have the data, it's about, examining it, right? So, you kinda wanna go through the data and maybe filter out stuff that's not important. If you have a log of, like, 10,000 lines and that log goes back to, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe it's not too important to keep all of those records. So just something to keep in mind, right? With examination, you're basically just filtering out only relevant information, to the attack. It's gonna be a little bit difficult to determine, but you kind of just use your best judgment, and sometimes it's a little bit, obvious. Okay, next is analysis, right? So once you've filtered out only the relevant information, you're actually going to be going ahead and correlating the evidence to a timeline. So you are going to be using tools to build timelines, getting evidence and putting them on the timeline, figuring out what happened when, and trying to just figure out like a piece, uh, trying to piece together the event that happened. Okay. And then finally, once you're done collecting the evidence and analyzing it, you're going to want to report it, right? So, reporting is just about summarizing your findings via documentation. This is kind of where that legal and regulatory reporting comes in, right? Whether you're reporting to a government agency or management in your enterprise, right? So, though your analysis may be super technical, you want to make sure that you're tailoring the report to somebody that does not have a technical background. Generally speaking, it depends, right? If the level of information that you need to include in your report is technical, it is what it is. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the key phases. So basically, just figuring out what you can collect, collecting it, analyzing it, and then making a final report on your findings. Okay, and so let's go into some of the evidence types that you might find. First is going to be volatile data. So this is going to be stuff like RAM, um, sometimes ROM, but usually just generally RAM. Volatile data in general is just going to be anything that loses information when power is not supplied anymore. So, oh, I also have active network connections as well, right? Once your computer turns off, all the network connections that it had are going to be also uh, deleted, right? They're just going to be disconnected. So volatile data is usually one of the most important pieces of evidence that you want to capture, just because in the case of maybe system instability or what have it, you want to get that data in its most complete form off the computer as fast as possible. Additionally, right, other programs could be constantly opening, and the evidence that you want to collect may be overwritten. So it's kind of important to go ahead and try to capture as much volatile data as possible because of its non-permanence. Okay. Um, the opposite of volatile is going to be non-volatile data. So this is going to be stuff that's persistent, right? Usually stuff that's written to disks or drives or USB, whatever you might have it. So yeah, so the non-volatile data is just data that still stays on the um, storage medium when power is not supplied, right? So basically the opposite of volatile data. Volatile um, data is removed with no power. With the non-volatile data, data is maintained even despite power. Okay, so some files going to be on your disks are going to be stuff like non-volatile data, log files, registry entries, databases, stuff like that. Okay, cool. Next is going to be network evidence. So this is regarding captured network traffic. If you have network evidence but you never really captured it, then you don't really have evidence. It's just kind of stuff that happened, and you don't have a record of it, right? So yeah, so captured network traffic. We saw some PCAP files when we went over network traffic analysis, but also intrusion detection systems as well. The logs from that are a form of captured network traffic. Generally speaking, you'd probably want to go more towards the PCAP range, but you're not kind of always capturing live network data all the time. So it is what it is. And like I said, because of the fact that network connections are volatile data, you kind of want to collect the network information uh, secondarily or maybe tertiary, right? You want to maybe collect it third after the non-volatile data. Okay. Next, application artifacts. So this is just generally any data that was created by a software program, right? By any app, whether it's a log, whether it's a new file that they made, or they wrote to the standard output. I have here browser history as well. So just in general, any data that was created by a software program. Generally speaking, it could be a mix of both non-volatile and volatile, but it's generally more on the non-volatile data. Okay. And the last piece of information that you might be scanning is going to be metadata. So this is hidden data in a file that you might not explicitly see unless you're looking for it, right? If you open up a picture, generally speaking, the first thing that you're going to see is the picture. If you want to access the metadata of the picture, that's going to be either a submenu that you need to access, or it would need to be an entirely different program that you open it on to be able to see that information, right? So stuff like EXIF data, some document authors, right? If you have office files, or in the case of like image data as well, GPS location. Okay, cool. Let's move on to some tools. So I have a couple here for forensics, just because it can be a uh, pretty complicated process, right? So there's a lot of specialized tools for doing very specialized tasks. Um, Again, you'd be able to see that if you give it a shot. So first and foremost, we went over kind of saving data. So this is where this section right here comes in: disk imaging and analysis. So these are going to be tools that either do the imaging themselves, right? They take a drive or a USB or whatever storage medium, and they put it into a file format that can be examined later. So that would be something like DC3DD, I believe FTK Imager is also part of that group, but I'm not too sure. I don't remember off the top of my head. But also, once you have those imaging files, um, analyzing them is going to be just as important, right? So tools like SleuthKit and Autopsy are going to be very important for opening those image files, right, and analyzing them. Cool. I have some links attached here. I'm not going to go ahead and open them just because they're going to be available in the notes if you wanted to look at them. Okay. Next is going to be tools regarding related to volatile memory. So this is going to be extracting data from any volatile data sources. I believe these tools are focused around just memory dumps, but there are tools like for other sorts of volatile data. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. So volatility is one, and then there's this other tool, recall, which is just kind of like a fork of volatility. Yeah, there's plenty of other ones like memdump, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Next is going to be network traffic information. So we kind of went over these already. Wireshark and Zeek, right? We went over those in plenty of our other sections. Like I've been saying before, all of these different categories just kind of melt together sometimes, right? So keep that in mind. So Wireshark is obviously not just analyzing, but you could also capture the traffic into a more permanent PCAP state. Same thing with Zeek, right? It's a IDS, um, and it offers logs and stuff like that that lets you keep track of network traffic. Then there's also Network Miner, which is just a different kind of tool. It's specifically for network forensics, as you could see here. Oops. Okay, I'll just leave it open. Why not? Just kidding. Okay. Next is going to be file artifacts. So these are going to be tools for extracting information out of files. First off, we have EXIF tools. This is just going to be a website that lets you do it online, but there's also EXIF tool singular, which is a program you can download onto your computer to read those files. So that's going to be obviously for EXIF data. But there's also other tools, right? So, for example, strings. Strings is a built-in command into Linux that basically lets you extract strings from file binaries, right? So sometimes in file binaries there are human readable strings in there, where plain text, and strings allows you to extract those and kind of isolate them away from everything else. Okay, built in. And then finally, we have a binwalk. So binwalk is just a program that lets you, I guess, visually walk through and open binary files and like look through them. Another one is also hexwalk, I believe, is another one that you could use, which is similarly in function. Okay. Then we have timeline reconstruction. So this is all about the analysis and reporting section. So these are going to be tools that allow you to easily build a timeline of events. I don't know too much about these. I just kind of stumbled upon them. But these are tools that basically, I believe Plazo here is a tool that aggregates logs and examines like timestamps and automatically builds like a timeline from those timestamps. So it's actually super cool. And then time sketches, I believe, something similar, just kind of like in an online cloud instance. So pretty cool that you can kind of automate this process rather than doing it on your own. And then finally, I know we covered it in other sections relating to log analysis, but just as important here, right? Cloud platforms experience attacks, and so needing to collect evidence on there is just as important. So just some tools on here. I'm not going to go too deep into them. Okay, so that's kind of the tool section. Again, it's a little bit more extensive than maybe some of the other sections that we have, but again, with forensics is just so many different things that you could analyze, and each kind of thing has its own like data structure, and so they need different tools to be able to look through them. Right? If you're trying to fix a broken image or a broken database file or what have it, they're all going to be slightly different workflows that might have overlapping tool sets, but generally speaking, sometimes there's going to be a specific tool for one task. Okay, so let's go into volatile memory forensics. So, the reason why volatile memory forensics is very important, as I said, is because not only is the data going to be deleted once the power is cut, um, and not only is there a risk of it being overwritten, but secondarily or tertiarily to that is that malwares and just attackers in general like to stay in memory. And the reason why is because it's very expensive for programs to be able to read memory. So that's why, generally speaking, antiviruses and intrusion detection systems generally don't read memory. I think that they're starting to now, but historically they have not. And so staying in memory basically allows them to avoid detection, but also avoid leaving permanent traces on the computer. Right, trying not to write logs and stuff like that. Okay. So some stuff you'd want to look out for is going to be suspicious processes, right? Um, I know I get kind of freaked out when I open up Task Manager every once in a while and I kind of see like a weird program running in there, and I Google like what it is, and it's just some random obscure Windows program that is running. So yeah, just keep out for that. Especially any files that don't have like a file path, right? If they exist purely in memory, right? Which is possible, right? You can run a program directly from memory. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit suspicious for a program not to, or sorry, suspicious for a program to exist entirely in memory. Okay. Another one is going to be unusual network traffic, right? So keep out for anything that kind of looks weird. Hidden DLL and hooks, right? So linked libraries and stuff like that. Any kind of libraries that can obscure the functionality of a program, right? If you're looking through source code, you might not be able to see any sort of malicious code, but the malicious code is present in some sort of auxiliary library that gets linked during runtime and stuff like that. Or it could just be that a DLL was completely overwritten with malicious code. That's also completely possible. So yeah, you just want to kind of keep a lookout for that. And then finally, it's going to be malware artifacts. I mean, duh, obviously, but still want to kind of point it out. So you want to look out for sort of any thread injections or encoded payloads, right? Just basically anything that's trying to hide or trying to obfuscate its activity. Okay, so that's volatile memory forensics, right? Directly relating to trying to stay under the radar. You kind of want to look out for stuff that is trying to stay hidden, right? It's kind of hard, right? If a program's, or sorry, if an attacker is trying to be hidden, it's going to be a little bit harder to detect them. So um, just kind of got to know the techniques to be able to do that. Okay, next is going to be file artifact analysis. Oops. So it's going to be differ a little bit depending on the operating system, but generally speaking, you want to kind of look out for any sort of information in the files that you can extract. So, for example, right, file timestamps that I have here. So when it was modified, accessed, created, deleted, all that kind of stuff. You could use those timestamps to be able to build a timeline, right? Let's say you created a file and then later on some attacker accessed it. Maybe a year later, they modified it with malicious code. Who knows? I can't. Just a simple example. Okay. So yeah, so some stuff you want to look out for, right? Deleted files can often be recovered, especially when you image a drive. If you image a drive in place and the file has been downloaded, it's still there. It's just marked as free space for whoever to use. So if you've ever, accidentally deleted something, it's still very possible to recover that file in at least some form. Um, Unless it's been completely overwritten, right, in a format, or if, for example, the operating system just put new information in the place of the deleted file. But generally speaking, they can be often recovered. Okay. And so some artifacts to look out for on Windows are going to be the registry, right? So you're going to want to look in the registry for any suspicious sort of entries, just because it's like the main configuration hub for a Windows system. You're also going to want to be looking out for event logs, right? Anything that happened on the system is going to be in the event viewer. And then the recycle bin, right? Looking out for deleted files. Sometimes there could be like a suspicious file in there that you don't remember ever downloading, and you're like, why is it in the recycle bin, right? Likewise, in Linux, there's var/log, right? It's going to be a little bit different depending on the distribution, but this is just like kind of as general speaking as possible. Um, I know, for example, on my distro, it's not var/log, so uh, yeah, just keep that in mind. It's just kind of just a basic idea of this kind of thing. So yeah, so system logs there, bash history, right? You want to be able to see like a history of what commands have been run. Again, if there's like a attacker on your system and they're running shell commands, right? You want to be able to see what's going on. Additionally, credential info, right? If any new users have been added, right, that you didn't add, it's going to be kind of suspicious. And then cron tab. So this is dealing with persistence, right? So attackers generally like putting stuff in cron tab because cron tab allows you to do tasks in an interval. So for example, in cron tab, I can tell my computer to run a command every day or on startup or on shutdown or whenever a computer resets in general. So cron tab is just a way to kind of schedule tasks. And so attackers often put their malware or whatever in cron tab to maintain persistence. Okay. And then finally, timeline analysis. So, timeline analysis is just all about basically building a timeline of events to kind of figure out what happened and then actually looking at the timeline to figure out the details. Okay. So, a timeline is obviously going to help you correlate when files might have been modified. It's going to let you correlate when stuff happened via log events. It's going to let you correlate network events that happen, right? Whether a file was uploaded or a remote desktop session was initiated, as well as any registry informations. Basically speaking, you just want to build a narrative of who did what, when do they do it, and how they did it, right? So that's what timeline analysis is all about. Okay, cool. So nice speed run of forensics. Obviously, um, there's a lot of nuance to this topic that I'm not going to be able to cover. But this is just kind of like a general idea that at least will get you started um, in the topic area. Okay. Like I said, we're going to skip over the relevant exercises, but they're going to be still here um, in the notes, regardless. Okay. Cool. So let's go ahead and move on to our next topic here, which is going to be cryptography. Oh, I should actually say, any questions on forensics before we actually move on to cryptography? Like I said, it's a little bit more on the straightforwarder end. It's a little bit more straightforward than some of the other topics. It's just the complexity comes from actually performing the tasks, right? They can be very it can be very technical because forensics itself depends on the knowledge of the other practices that we go over in these meetings. So if you have any questions about it, or if you have any comments or something to add, or anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay, okay, for sure. See you, Robbie. Bye. Okay, sounds good. So no questions, no comments, nothing. Cool. Okay, so let's move on to cryptography. So, cryptography is basically the study and practice of techniques used for secure communication. So, we kind of went over some of these topics already, but I'm going to bring them up anyway because they are foundational to this topic. So, basically, Ooh, oops, did not mean to. Where am I? Oh, I see. The heck happened? There we go. Okay, cool. So yeah, so cryptography is basically um, yeah, so the study and practice of techniques for secure communication. I have here that it's the foundation of the CIA triad, um, but more broadly, it's kind of the foundation of cybersecurity, right? Without cryptography, there wouldn't be any security in the cyberspace, right, between computers, right? So it's kind of the whole foundation of this field. So if you're interested in getting into cybersecurity, unfortunately, you're going to need to get yourself familiar with at least the basics of cryptography, which is what we're going to cover right now. And so, when you study cryptography, basically, you're going to want to identify techniques used to encrypt, obfuscate, or hide messages, right? So, you want to be able to determine between the three, or sorry, between the two, I should say. You want to be able to determine whether a message was either encrypted, right, in the sense that you need to have a special key to access the information, or if it was just obfuscated, right? You could reverse the operation, and the information was just kind of hidden away from you. Okay. And then crypto analysis is kind of a subset of cryptography. Crypto analysis is basically the study of trying to break or recover stuff from cryptographic operations. So it's basically the study of techniques used to break or recover plain text, right? Plain text being human readable stuff, right? Messages. Okay. And so cryptography is used in a bunch of different use cases, some of which are secure messaging, right? Think Telegram or Signal or just encryption in general, VPNs, TLS, and HTTPS. Those kind of go hand in hand just because they are HTTPS relies on TLS to function. Disk encryption, right? Being able to securely store files on your hard drive. Password storage, likewise, right? Being able to securely store passwords on your device, and many, 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 many more. Okay, there's like I said, this is like the foundation for cybersecurity in general. So there's a lot of nuance to this topic. Okay, and before we get into it, some possible attack surfaces that an attacker could use against you, cryptographically speaking, are kind of just always in a tug of war. Okay, so the main thing you kind of want to be looking out for is basically social engineering. That's really the only thing you can more or less control if you're using some sort of platform and need security, right? Otherwise, these are all going to be at the mercy of the programmer creating the app. So, for example, weak keys, right? If you are using a very strong encryption standard, like we're going to cover in just a couple minutes here, but the keys that you generate are very weak. It's not going to be as effective of an encryption standard. Likewise, if you have a strong key, but the actual encryption standard itself is not strong, it's going to be likewise just as useless. Okay. Bad implementation. So this is going to be a little bit out of your control unless you're the one developing secure applications. If you don't implement, you know, good practices for security and encryption in general, or not just encryption, just any security standard, as we're going to cover in just a second here, um, it's going to be you're going to significantly reduce the security of your application, right? If you're not following good practices. Okay. Next is going to be reused IVs. It's going to be the same thing with bad implementation here. IV is initialization vector. This is basically just a value that you feed in to some encryption modes or encryption algorithms to kind of get them started. And then once they get started, they kind of take over. So yeah, obviously reusing them is poor because it lets your it gives your encrypted or it gives your secure messages patterns, and patterns are what break security. Okay. Finally, we have poor RNG. So RNG stands for random number generation. So having poor random number generation basically means that your computer is not able to, uh, I guess, generate or it's not able to be random. I mean, generally speaking, computers aren't truly random. They are deterministic in the sense that they follow step by step. So there's always a algorithm to everything. There's nothing that's ever truly random about our conventional computers now, but there are better implementations of random number generation and there are worse ones. So if you have a random number generator that's just not good in general, then that breaks your encryption as well because well, if it's not random, that means that there's a pattern, and the common fault point for breaking a secure message is going to be a pattern, right? If you're able to determine patterns, you're able to uh, uh, kind of reverse engineer basically, right? I'll kind of give just this example in the sense of what I'm talking about with patterns, right? So if I get a piece of ciphertext and I'm able to determine that in the ciphertext, the letter B corresponds to plain text R, right? I can then replace every B in my ciphertext with the letter R, right? And that can maybe lead me down the road to figuring out more and more words until I basically solve the message without ever having to decrypt it. So yeah, just generally speaking, patterns are not good. Okay, so here are some kind of fundamentals of cryptography. Like I said, there's going to be kind of some nuance to this topic. These are just really, generally speaking, the basics of what you need to know to be able to be proficient in cybersecurity. Okay, so the first term is going to be plain text. So plain text is something that you are able to read. Generally speaking, something you are able to understand. Okay, it is the original message, the message as it is intended to be read by either human or machine. Opposite to that is ciphertext. So ciphertext is basically I'll just say a representation of the plain text, right? I have obfuscated representation, but basically it's just a hidden representation of what the plain text should be, right? You want to generate ciphertext in this in the event that you are passing messages along an insecure route, or sorry, an insecure channel. And by securing your plain text into a ciphertext, you're able to safely pass it to the recipient, who will then de-obfuscate it back to the plain text. Okay. So ciphertext in general, it's not, I wouldn't say it's just encryption, right? You can encrypt a message that requires a key, right? But you could also encode a message, right? If I convert my string to hexadecimal or I convert my string to base 64, right? Those can make it a little bit harder to read, or just generally encoding it to a different format. So yeah, so ciphertext is just generally an obfuscated representation of plain text, right? The original message that you want to send. Okay. And I mentioned keys a lot. Basically, a key is a parameter that is passed into a function to derive a ciphertext, right? So this is going to be uh, whether it's a hashing function or it's a encryption function. Keys are going to be a parameter that you pass in that controls um, how the ciphertext comes out. Now, in the case of hashing functions, when you pass in a key, there's no way to reverse it. It's just kind of like just an initial value or something like that. Whereas with an encryption function, a key is a parameter that you pass in that you are then able to use to decrypt the message back to plain text. Okay. And so we're going to cover some of the types of encryptions. The first one is going to be symmetric encryption. So symmetric encryption is going to be one that uses a single key, right? A single key for both encryption and decryption. I have an example here as AES. Um, so yeah, so this is going to be one where a secret is known between sender and recipient, and they use that same secret to um, encrypt and decrypt messages. So because there is only one secret, it is generally more secure uh, than using the other format, which we're going to talk about in a second, asymmetric encryption. So it's a little bit more secure. The problem is um, you need to have an exchange of the key, and the exchange of the key cannot be done uh, securely without encryption. And so, if somebody got access to the key, then game over, pretty much. Okay, so yeah, so it's the stronger encryption format of the two, but its weakness lies in needing to exchange the key. Um, if you are able to intercept traffic where a client and sorry, where a sender and recipient exchange the key, then you basically broke that entire encryption completely. Generally speaking, though, that kind of only happens once. So once the key is exchanged, you're good. And if the attacker tries to intercept your encrypted messages after your key was exchanged, there's nothing really much that they could do. Okay. Secondarily, symmetric encryption is generally slower because it's more powerful. So it's harder to decrypt or like to brute force. Okay, so that's symmetric encryption. Now, on the other hand, asymmetric encryption is going to be a little bit different. It's in the sense that you generate two keys. You have a public and a private key. I have some examples here: RSA and elliptic curve um, cipher or cryptography. I don't remember what the last C was. Basically, the idea with asymmetric encryption is that you don't need a key exchange um, in the same sense that symmetric encryption does. So um, you have a public key, which you just kind of share with anybody, right? Anybody can have access to your public key, which is why it's called a public key. Um, but you keep your private key a secret, and only you should know your private key. Nobody else should know it. Period. You don't share that. Unlike with a symmetric encryption key, where you have to share the private key with somebody to be able to communicate securely. With asymmetric encryption, you do not need to share your secret key, your private key. Okay. And so basically, the way that it works is let's say I want to send a message to somebody. That somebody, I'll just call them, I don't know, Bob. Okay. So Bob sends me his public key, right? I can't decrypt any of his messages with his public key. So he can safely send me his public key. Okay. Bob sends me his public key. I encrypt my message with his public key, and I send my message to him, right? My ciphertext that was encrypted with his public key. Now, the only way that can be decrypted is with Bob's private key. Okay. So nobody that intercepts that message is able to decrypt the message unless they have access to Bob's private key. Okay. So, yeah, and then Bob takes that cipher text. Like I said, he can decrypt it with his private key. And now, if he wants to send me a message back, then he would take my public key, encrypt his message with my public key, and then send it to me. And then I would decrypt it with my private key. Okay. So, like I said, in that sense, you don't need that exchange of the secret. You still need a key exchange, right? In the sense that the sender and the sender of the information needs the recipient's public key. So there is a key exchange, but the difference is with symmetric encryption, you need to, generally speaking, you need to exchange that key securely, which means that it's a secret, right? You can't have it exposed. With asymmetric encryption, a public key can just be publicly shared. There's no danger if your public key was exposed. Okay. Um, So yeah, so due to the nature of the encryption, it's generally speaking, it's less computationally intensive than a symmetric encryption algorithm. Um, so uh, for that reason, it's less secure, but at the same time, it allows you to generate ciphertext faster, and therefore, for time-sensitive tasks, in the case like web communication and stuff like that, asymmetric encryption is preferred. And generally speaking, asymmetric encryption is good enough to where you could just kind of solely use it. But generally speaking, when you have more sensitive information, you would want to be using symmetric encryption just because it's a little bit more powerful than asymmetric encryption. Okay. So symmetric encryption, more powerful, but relies on sharing a single secret. So once that secret is exposed, you're kind of screwed. Whereas asymmetric encryption is weaker, but does not rely on sharing secrets. So you don't need to uh, share any secrets. You could basically keep your key locked away, and you never need to transmit it ever. Right? As long as you keep it securely on your laptop or on your computer, or whatever I should say in general. If nobody gains access to your computer, they don't have access to your secret. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's talk about types of ciphers. So ciphers are the um, I'll just say algorithms that convert plain text to ciphertext. And there's basically two different kinds. So um, there's going to be a block cipher and a stream cipher. Okay. So a block cipher is a type of algorithm that encrypts data in fixed block sizes. That's why it's called a block cipher. So basically, let's say I need to have my data. Okay, let's say I wanted to transmit a secure message. And if I use a block cipher, the block cipher is going to expect some certain amount of blocks. So let's say it needs blocks of, let's say, 50 bytes. Okay. So, for example, if my message is exactly 50 bytes, okay, the block cipher says no problem. But if my message is less than or more than 50 bytes, I should say, if my message is not a multiple of 50, right? If it's not like 100 or, 150, right? Something that could be divided into 50 blocks, right? If it's something like 10 or if it's like 64 bytes, right? Stuff like that. So if it's more or less than the block size, right? The block cipher is going to be like, what do you want me to do with this? I can't do anything with it. I need it to be represented in the block that I expect. So generally speaking, with block ciphers, data needs to be what's called padded. So this is just where you add zeros to the front or to the end of your data to be able to make your data fit into the block size, right? So if I had 64 bytes of data and I wanted to use a block cipher, generally speaking, I would pad out the data to that next 50 block, which is 100. So I would want to take my data from 64 bytes to 100 bytes, and that will give me two blocks of 50 that I can send into my block cipher, and it won't complain. Okay. On the other hand, a stream cipher is one that encrypts data one bit or a byte at a time. So you send it data one unit at a time, and it's able to progressively encrypt your information. So obviously, it's more powerful. it's a little bit more useful in the sense that you don't need to pad out your information, um, and you could just give it whatever amount, and it's able to encrypt and decrypt the information regardless of the size of your data. The downside is though that it's less secure. So stream ciphers are generally speaking less secure than block ciphers, um, whereas block ciphers are more secure. Um, and the reason behind that is even though we've been talking about how, um, patterns are always a problem when it comes to cryptography, right? I've been saying that a lot. And obviously, if our block size is fixed, right, that's a pattern, right? If I know that my cipher expects 50 bytes, then I know that every 50 bytes is a new block, right? That's a pattern. But the thing with block ciphers is all of the data in a block, right? There's a fixed start and a fixed end to the data, and you could basically just scramble it as much as you want and make it as difficult as possible. Um, Almost nearly get rid of like any sort of pattern that is present in the information. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, right? I know the start and end of my data. I can scramble it as much as I want. Okay. Whereas with a stream cipher, right? I don't know when my data is going to end, when it could end in 50 bytes, it could end in 500 bytes, who knows? And so there's a limit to how much I can scramble the information, just because that stream of data itself is going to be a pattern, right? You're able to kind of see it um, kind of happen. So yeah, so stream ciphers are generally speaking a little bit less secure than block ciphers, but they're more convenient. Okay. Cool. And then some other notes, other key topics that you need to know. We kind of talked about this, the difference between a hash and like encryption and stuff like that. But I'll go over it here just in case. So a hash is a one-way function. I have an example here: SHA-256 and MD5. Those are one-way functions, which means that they are not reversible. Okay. So if I feed a function ABC, it gives me some hash. I cannot take that hash and feed it back into an algorithm that gives me the original text. The only way that I can get the original text is if I basically brute force, right? I try every combination, right? We saw that when we did the password cracking topic. Okay, so hash one way. Unlike encryption, or encoding, which is two-way, right? I can feed data into an encryption or encoding algorithm and it spits out data. Then I can take that data, feed it back into the same algorithm and get back the plain text. Okay, so hashing, hashing is one way. Um, Encoding and encrypting is two way. Okay, so like I said, encoding reversible. Um, the difference between encoding and encryption is that encryption is intended to stay secret. So if I have an encrypted message, the only way I can unencrypt it is by using some secret, right? There's some secret key that I need to pass in as a parameter to be able to extract the plain text out of it. Okay. Whereas with an encoding is never meant to be secret. It's just a different representation of data. So why would you want to use an encoding? So for example, let's say I wanted to transfer a binary file, right? Like a .exe over the internet. Um, Sometimes, or sorry, not even over the internet, right? Let's say I wanted to pass it from one program to the next, right? Generally speaking, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to take that binary information and encode it in a way that lets you pass it. So, for example, let's say I wanted to have an image file, the entirety of an image file stored in a JSON. Okay, a JSON is like uh, it's like a data format that lets you store JavaScript objects in text form. Okay, so plain text. So what that means is that I need to be able to convert my image data, which is a binary format, into text, right? So I need to encode it, right? I don't, well, generally speaking, let's say I don't want the image to be secret, right? It's not a secret image. I'm just going to encode it, which means once the server receives my image data, it can then decode it and get back the original image information. So encoding is reversible, but it's non-secret, right? Usually you just want to use it to represent data in some way. And so I have examples here, base 64 and hex. There's a bunch of different ones, like pickle, for example. Okay. Final term is obfuscation. I know I've said it kind of a lot here, but basically, obfuscation is the idea of intentionally hiding the format or intent of data, right? So I'm just trying to represent my data in a different way that makes it more difficult to understand um, what is being represented, but also why the data exists. So generally speaking, obfuscation is not it's not like secure. It's not meant to be a secret. It's just meant to be not easily readable. Now, that doesn't mean that obfuscation doesn't if a piece of data is obfuscated, that doesn't mean it's not encrypted, right? It's still possible, right? Encryption is a way of intentionally hiding the format of data, right? If I have plain text and I want to make sure that nobody else can read it, then I'm going to intentionally encrypt it, right? That's changing the format of the data, right? And then I send it to somebody and they can decrypt it, right? But generally speaking, obfuscation it doesn't imply that it's supposed to be secure, right? So I can also encode my data, right? If I have some plain text, right, some secret text that I want to hide somewhere, but I don't want it to stand out, right? I don't want it to look like plain text. I could I could obfuscate it in a different format, right? So if I'm trying to hide, for example, data in a image or some sort of binary file, I can convert that plain text into I can basically encode it, maybe shift the bits a little bit, make it look like legitimate binary data, and put it into my image file. So obfuscation is basically just the technique of intentionally hiding or formatting data in a way that makes it not easily readable. Okay, cool. So we talked a little bit about the different kinds of ciphers, but let's get into some direct examples. So the first category here is going to be classical or historical ciphers. So these are going to be ones that generally aren't used in practical applications, but they are commonly used in uh, they're commonly used in situations where you don't need the utmost security. You're just kind of like maybe trying to demonstrate something, or you just don't want something to be human readable. You don't really care if it's like machine. A machine can decrypt it, right? It's just you need to make it hard for humans to read. Just for example, so like I said here, it's commonly used in CTFs, right, where you don't want something that's super insanely difficult to be solved, right? Um, but also some malware use it here and there just to kind of obfuscate themselves. Okay, and so some examples are going to be substitution and transposition. So a substitution cipher is basically where I take one character and I replace it for another, right? So A becomes Z, F becomes H, for example, right? So that's a substitution. It's not just letters; it could be any character, right? The number one becomes A, or dollar sign becomes period, for example. Okay, so substitution is just taking one character and substituting it for another. Okay. Transposition is the idea of changing the position, right? So trans is Greek for change, and position is, well, position, right? So you're changing the position. Generally speaking, it's going to be stuff where you just shift stuff around. So you could either do ciphers that shift stuff to the right, shift stuff to the left. Maybe you're uh, changing, maybe character one now goes into character one moves to position five, and then character five moves to position two, two to three, so on and so forth. It's basically just changing positions. Um, Oftentimes, ciphers employ a combination of the two, right? So by either doing multiple substitutions or multiple transpositions or multiple substitutions and transpositions, you're able to build stronger ciphers. So that's kind of how common cryptography is based around. It's the idea of employing these two basic ciphers. I have another one here, the Visionaire cipher. This is just I'll pull it up here. Uh, so the Visionaire cipher is like a an antiquated cipher that involves using like a lookup table basically to determine uh, what's it called to determine your ciphertext. So this is an example of substitution. So you have a input row, you generate a key, and you follow along with the key, so on and so forth. So it's just a different type of cipher. Feel free to look it up on your own if you want to. Okay, cool. And then we're going to move on to modern implementations. So obviously, like I said, those aren't really used anymore. In production, these are going to be the ones that you're going to actually see. So AES stands for Advanced Encryption Standard. It is a block cipher, right? Which means that you need to have data of a certain size passed into it. That has many modes. So there's EBC, which is ECB, electronic code book. There's Counter. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. Let me just look it up. Yeah, so electronic code book. There's Counter right here. Cipher feedback, cipher blockchaining, so on and so forth. Not too important. Feel free to look at it on your own if you want to figure out what all these different modes do. But basically, the different modes are just ways of making the encryption stronger rather than just solely relying on the algorithm, right? They're just basically additional operations to obfuscate the information. Okay. So, yeah, block cipher. Next, we have RSA. So RSA, I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but it's basically the names of the three people that came up with this algorithm. I believe one of them died recently, so it's been around for a super long time. But yeah, it's not the strongest algorithm nowadays, but it's still used here and there. Commonly, it's used for, as you can see here, signatures, so digital signatures when you're signing a message, or for key exchanges, right? You don't need the strongest form of encryption; you just need some form of encryption to be able to exchange a symmetric key. So that's where RSA can come in, right? It's generally pretty fast. Okay. Finally, another example is going to be ECC. So ECC is elliptic curve. I believe it's cryptography or cipher. I don't remember exactly. But basically, the idea is that ECC is a super duper strong cipher, but it's light enough that low end hardware is able to utilize it. So the thing with encryption is that generally speaking, the more complicated your um, encryption operations are, the harder it will be to decrypt it, right? So if you spend a lot of time encrypting your information, it's going to be just as hard, if not harder, for attackers to later decrypt it. Okay. The problem is, right, with lower end hardware, they don't have the power to do those stronger algorithms in a short amount of time to make them effective, right? So generally speaking, before ECC came out, mobile devices had to rely on older forms of encryption, which made them less secure. But with elliptic curve, it kind of eliminates that need. So elliptic curve is a super super duper strong uh, encryption algorithm. It's strong enough that even not just mobile devices, but even workstation devices like laptops and desktops and stuff like that are able to use it effectively. Right? It's still an effective algorithm being used today. So it's computationally uh, not computationally, or how do I say this without not making it sound bad? Basically, it's less complex than other algorithms, but it's relatively speaking in layman's not layman's terms, but just realistically speaking, it's equivalent to other encryption algorithms in the sense that it's gonna do the job just good enough, uh, rather than using a older form. Okay, so that's going to be some modern examples. There's going to be a bunch of other ones that I don't have listed, like HMAC and uh, can't remember them off the top of my head. I had all this at the top of my head earlier. Yeah, HMAC is one of them that utilizes your hardware to determine a ciphertext, which basically makes it a little bit more difficult to decrypt and stuff like that. So yeah, but this is just like a simple list of stuff that you need to know fundamentally, right? This isn't a total list of all the encryption algorithms. Okay, so let's move on. So, like I said, cryptoanalysis is basically the study of trying to reverse encryption. So, whereas cryptography is the study of generally uh, s- uh, secure, uh, how do I say it? Like just the general study of secure. Uh, I'm trying to say it without using any of the words that I just talked about. Um, Photography is like the study of securely being able to I'll just say securely message. Okay, I'll just put it like that. That's not correct exactly, but we'll just say that. Whereas crypto analysis is the study of trying to um, break, right, or reverse stuff. So, for example, frequency analysis. Okay, so even though a piece of ciphertext is completely obfuscated from the human perception, right? You're just not able to tell what's going on. You could still at least analyze um, stuff about the ciphertext. So, for example, if the same letter keeps coming on, or sorry, keeps coming up over and over and over again, right? You're able to determine that, hey, maybe that letter is, something that's commonly used in a language. So, for example, in English, right, vowels are commonly used, whereas, like Z is like one of the least commonly used letters, right? So, if a letter is super duper common in a piece of ciphertext, it's probably not going to be Z, right? Generally speaking. And then we also have the study of grams in general, so bigrams, trigrams, so on and so forth. So these are, I'll just look it up instead of trying to define it myself. Basically, it's kind of like the study of kind of splitting up um, information into chunks of two, I should say. And so, what you're able to do is you're able to determine like relationships between bigrams. Let me take a look at this image. Maybe it'll help. Um, it's not exactly the best image, but it might be all we have. Um, no. Let me see. Maybe this one. Um, okay. Well, I'll just use this one. This isn't exactly what I was trying to showcase, but basically, if you look at this graph, these are words that are interconnected, which basically means that um, when you see two words together, um, it's more likely to see two words together that are commonly together rather than two words that are not commonly together. So for example, we have here in the middle, I don't know if you guys can let me zoom in. In the middle here, we have the word miss. Okay. And so we have just some examples of other words that are generally speaking close to Miss, right? So you could say Miss Anne, Miss Moreland, Miss Smith, Miss Taylor, right? These are names, right? Versus if you said something like Miss Time, right? That's generally going to be less common. And so by doing gram analysis, you're able to kind of determine when two pieces of information are supposed to be together. Now, the reason why I didn't want to kind of use this example exactly is because there is, I guess, like a subsection of this where you split words themselves into sections. So for example, let me pull up a notepad here. Okay. So let's say I had a piece of text, like hello world. Okay. This is going to be super simple to analyze, right? Even if I were to ciphertext it, right? Because um, I uh, generally speaking, if I was able to determine that this word is hello, I can maybe determine what this second word is, depending on what words usually follow hello. Okay. But the reason why I'm able to do that is because of the space. The space gives me extra information, right? So, what if I got rid of the space? Okay, now it's a little bit more difficult to determine. But again, we have the capital letters here. So, the capital letters are able to tell me possibly the start and ends of a word. Okay, so let's get rid of those. Okay, so imagine I was given this kind of piece of information as a cipher. Just imagine it's ciphered. I don't want to go and actually um, encrypt it. Okay. Generally speaking, it's going to be very difficult to determine where where words start and where it ends, right? And so, what you're able to do is you could actually split this chunk of data into sections. So bigrams or trigrams or quadgrams, et cetera. So if I could split this in two somehow and make it make sense, then I'm able to determine what the original text is. Okay. So for example, let's just say I encrypted or decrypted these first four letters. Okay. I was just brute forcing it one by one until I figured out that, this is hell. Okay. And then I know that hell is a word, for example. Okay. So let's try splitting the the phrase right there. Okay. Then we have this other section, and then we try to solve for this section. Is there any word that kind of has this length that might follow hell? Okay, probably not. Okay, sounds good. So let's solve the next letter. Okay, the next letter is probably O. Okay, cool. Let's split it up. Okay, um are there any words that generally follow hello that have 5 letters? Oh, okay, world. Boom, there you go. So, yes, that's basically the idea of frequency analysis. It's just basically being able to either analyze letter frequency or analyzing the um, the the relationship between words or the relationship between parts of words, right? Because bigrams could also be used to split up a long word into parts, and you're able to kind of reconstruct that word much easily. Okay. So just a simple thing, simple-ish explanation. I could look up the Google bigrams um, thing here. Okay, yeah. So this is a cool tool that you could take a look at. So this is Ngram viewer. So let me see if it has an about. No, not really. About Ngram viewer. There we go. So basically, it is a data set that basically allows you to display a graph showing how uh, those phrases occurred. Okay, so you're able to basically uh, determine the frequency of words in the book. So, for example, here you could see childcare peaked in 1990 and then fell down towards the 2014s or whatever. Uh, yeah, so this basically just kind of tracks frequency, right? So the more frequent a term is used, the more likely that is the text that you're trying to determine. It's like this super crazy rabbit hole that you could fall into if you took 378, CCS 378, one of the assignments. Will lead you down the path of studying bigrams, and then you realize that you really don't want to try to implement it. um, yeah, super interesting topic, but super duper complicated to get into. Generally speaking, computers, once you kind of get the algorithm going, computers are super duper easily able to uh, decrypt stuff. That's how you get programs that are able to break encryptions much faster than if you were to just try to brute force a bunch of keys. Okay, phew, that was super long on just frequency analysis. Let's kind of just move on here. So known plain text. So this is kind of just where you have a piece of text that you know. exists in the plain text. So if I bring up that hello world example, if I just have, this string of text, let's just say, but I know that a part of it is like, world, for example, here. Okay. I can then determine, okay, so this part, there's a part of the ciphertext that has world in it. Okay, so then I can try to decrypt the ciphertext with that knowledge. So again, it's just all about patterns. The more information you can feed into an algorithm to try to solve a piece of encrypted message, the better chances it's going to get at decrypting it. Next, we have brute force. This is like the most basic one. Is just basically where you try a bunch of different keys to try to determine what the actual original key was. Statistical and pattern detection. So this is similar to frequency analysis, but just generally, you're kind of trying to detect patterns. So is the text base 64? Does it look like base 64? Are there blocks that are repeated, right? Can we use those against the decryption? Are you able to determine if the algorithm is using a good random number generator? If not, that means that the quote unquote randomness has a pattern to it, right? So you're able to use statistics to break encryption rather than just kind of brute forcing it. And then we kind of got into it during password cracking, but hash cracking, we saw um, some forms there. So we saw dictionary attacks, brute force, rainbow tables, so on and so forth. Okay, let's get into some tools of cryptography. Okay, so first and foremost, we have the encoding and decoding. Okay. So these are going to be some tools that allow you to both encode data into a specific format, but also decode data back from the original format. So base 64 is an example of that, right? You can feed in data, and the base 64 algorithm is going to return a string um, that can be later decoded. Okay. There's also other programs like XXD and HexDump that allow you to view hex information in this example, but it also gives you tools for being able to see those hex that hex data being represented as strings. We already talked about this in the forensics, but strings is another tool that allows you to extract strings out of a binary file. Okay, so just encoding, decoding, checking for a specific type of encryption cryptography. I should have probably added hash ID into this, which I'm going to do right now. Hash ID is a tool that lets you determine what hashing algorithm was used, okay, on a piece of ciphertext, possibly. Okay. Next is going to be crypto utilities. So just utilities used commonly when performing cryptographic operations. The first one is going to be OpenSSL. Um, so this is just a tool used for encrypting, decrypting, generating keys, making secure messages, so on and so forth. It's just a whole super suite of tools used generally for encryption. Okay, so you could either use this like in your own command line, or if you're making a program that relies on secure communication, you can include a library that uses OpenSSL. Okay. Next, we have GPG, so GNU Privacy Guard. GNU Privacy Guard uses PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, which is just I guess like an encryption standard algorithm. I don't really know how to describe it, but basically, GPG is just like generally speaking, just GPG is a command line tool, but there are GUI tools available. And the purpose of that is to easily encrypt messages. So you just enter a message, it gives you it gives you an encrypted message back. You can send that off and not have to worry about it. Instead of like, fussing around with like OpenSSL, for example, right? First, you have to generate the keys, and then you have to encrypt it and put it into a certain format and stuff like that. GPG makes it generally a lot easier, especially if you use the GUI tools. Okay, cool. Finally, we have some analysis now. A lot of these also kind of fall into that category, but I kind of made these a little bit separately. So these are tools that allow you to analyze data, but also to try to transform the data back into its plain text. So maybe if you're not able to get it all the way back to plain text, if you're at least partially able to, it might get you a step further. So a website like CyberChef, for example, super useful. I'll pull it up here. It's basically just well, it's said here in the summary. It's a Swiss Army knife for cyber. So it has a bunch of different operations that you could perform on a piece of information. So, for example, if I put in "Hello World" here, I can go ahead and transform it into base 64. I can then take that base 64, transfer it into hex, put that hex into base 64, and then um, let's just try encrypting it with XOR. I'll make my key. Let's put into TF8. I don't know, encryption rocks, for example. Okay. And then I can then take that encryption and let's just say further uh, further put it into base 64 here. So to base 64 and then boom. Okay. And then this is completely reversible, obviously, because I know the steps of it. So this is just a super useful tool of being able to not only construct obfuscated data, but to also try and de-obfuscate data, right? So let me just duplicate this really quickly. So if I got this piece of ciphertext, right? First thing I already know is that, this is base 64. So I can open up the from base 64. Okay, I don't really know what this is, but obviously I just did the operation. In this case, I know it's a XOR. I could try the brute force. Yeah, it's probably not going to be able to to brute force it easily. It's fine. Let's just go with the regular XOR operation. With the key, I believe I put encryption rocks. Yeah, there we go. And then I can take that, put it back to so from base 64. Okay, this is hex. So I can go from hex. Okay, here's base 64. As you can see here, also CyberChef gives you some suggestions. So if I were to take off these, for example, okay. As you can see here, it's able to already determine that this is, you need to add base 64, hex, and base 64. And if I just click that little magic wand, it's going to be able to reconstruct it back. So pretty cool, super useful tool. You could sit here and kind of mess around with the operations, and given a piece of ciphertext, try to determine what it is. Super useful in NCL. I know I'm using this tool a lot in the competition. So yeah, something to keep in mind. Okay, cool. And so that's pretty much it. Like I said, we're not going to go over the relevant exercises. They're just going to be available with the notes. I'm going to probably post the notes and the recording tomorrow, just because I'm going to be doing the competition. Uh, but yeah, so kind of some of the more complicated topics. So I understand if it's a little bit complicated to um, start off learning these, but hopefully with these notes you're able to kind of get a better idea of kind of what's going on with these topics. Because once we get into next week is going to be, I'll just say, significantly more complex. I'm not even sure if we're going to be able to finish those topics. Um, I'll just try. We'll try our best. So before we get to that part where it's like super hard, any questions on what we covered today in terms of forensics or cryptography? Any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, cool. Okay, sounds good. Hopefully, this was informational. Hopefully, you're able to use this information, not only in the competition but also for your studies. Right, it's going to be very important as you kind of progress in in your scholarly adventure, that you kind of know some of these. But also when if you're planning on applying to some cyber jobs, these are going to be, this is generally speaking, everything that we covered up until this point, just right now, is going to be just basic knowledge that you're going to need. And so if you don't know these kind of off the top of your head, this is the best time to go ahead and get familiar with it and practice knowing this information. Okay. So, like I said, I'm going to post these notes probably tomorrow later in the day. Um, and yeah, thank you guys for coming in. Hopefully, I wasn't too boring. Um, and yeah, so I'll go ahead and see you guys on Thursday, where we'll hopefully cover one of the three topics. I don't know if we're going to do web app security, enumeration, or exploitation first. I'll just have to decide depending on difficulty. And yeah, so also on Thursday, we're going to reconvene and talk about the individual game as well. So yeah, that's it. Okay, done. Thank you guys for coming in. I'll stay a little bit after if you guys want to tell me something or ask me something. Otherwise, we're all set to go. See you guys on Thursday. Bye bye.